From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. K-State's Dan Devlin talks about a new report which resulted from a special conference co-hosted by K-State last summer. It looked at the prospect of climate change and what agricultural research and outreach priorities need to be established in response to it. Also, K-State's Sarah Sexton-Bowser and Jesse McCurry of Kansas Grain Sorghum talk about a new proposal by the EPA which would allow the sorghum oil derived from ethanol production to be used as a biofuel feedstock itself. They'll look at what that would mean for you grain sorghum producers. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Ward Upham will talk about forcing Paperwhite Flower Bulbs. All that here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
The theme of climate change is spoken of frequently, of course, in our society, and it has repercussions for agriculture, to be sure. A special conference was held this past summer, and Kansas State University was well represented in it. Part of an initiative which has been launched to look at the effects of climate change potentially on agriculture and just how we might respond to those changes in effect. We're talking now with Dan Devlin, who is the director of the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment here at Kansas State University. And he's been one of those in on the ground floor of this initiative since its origin. And Dan, take us back to how this more or less began several years ago, actually.
Well, right? I think it's always been, as we think about climate in Kansas, we always in southern. I think when I talk about this project, we're really talking about the southern Great Plains, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, and the universities, the land-grant universities at Oklahoma State and Texas A&M. In the last few years, we've heard more and more discussion about climate change, and we've spent time arguing about: is it happening? Is it not happening? And I would say in the southern Great Plains, so far we don't know because there's so much variability. Just this week, we had almost record cold.
Right.
And, of course, last year it was warm. Last couple winters have been warm all winter. And so we have so much variability that can we really tell what's occurring out there? One of the things that did happen a couple of years ago, we did a survey of 10,000 farmers and ranchers in Oklahoma and Kansas. And we said, do you think the climate's changed over your lifetime? And it was something like 75% of farmers said, yes, we think climate has changed. Weather's changed over that period of time. And so when we started looking at all of the things that were out there, and with my colleagues at Oklahoma State and Texas A&M, we said, if climate change is occurring, or if it's going to occur as predictions say right now by the climate scientists, what should we be doing in our research and extension programs around agriculture? Proactively. And should we go out and talk to our stakeholders and our scientists and see what they think the priorities are and what they'll be over the next 10 or 20 years? And right now, when we say changing climate, most of the predictions are saying we're going to see a warming course of temperatures, particularly in the wintertime. So we may see, I see all the way over the next 30 to 50 years, predictions of as much as 1 to 4 degree increase in average temperature. And, of course, it would be different times of the year. And then what I think the consensus would be now is that we'll see about the same rainfall, but it may come in more intense rainfall events. So we may see, instead of seeing that inch of rain 3 or 4 times, maybe we'll see a 2-inch rain a couple of times. And so that means we may have to manage a little bit differently. And so you start thinking about, well, if it's warmer in the winter, if we don't get quite as the average temperature in the winter is less, will that increase pest resistance? Will it have an increase on soils? Will it have an impact on feeding and cattle and livestock production? So we said, well, maybe we need to have a discussion. Mm-hmm. And that was really what this conference came about, was to bring in our stakeholders, and that would be our university research and extension faculty, as well as some agency people from NRCS, for example, and other state and federal agencies. And we also brought in farmers and ranchers also into that discussion.
This took place back in July in El Reno, Oklahoma, and it gathered all of these folks to talk about priorities for research and what things need to be put at the front of the line, if you will. How did this discussion come about, Dan, in that you're taking on a huge topic and is so comprehensive in its nature? How did you and this group get after this?
It was really a way too big of a topic, but the way we went about it was we really went into really about 6 different topics. We talked about cropland, rangeland, and livestock production, CAFOs, and also forestry. Those are really the 4 areas that we really focused on that we thought were key to our ag communities and ag production. We were really in breakout sessions, really what I call brainstorming, where we brought up all the priorities within a particular area, and then we focused those down into about 4 or 5 really major areas.
And what we want to do here, because the report from this conference, which just came out, that's why we're addressing it today, it's massive. But when you look at those priorities and what potential roadmap might be followed, as you put it, for researching those priorities, what things leap off of the page here, Dan?
Well, I don't know that necessarily, when I think about things leaping off the pages, there's some things that we looked at. For example, one of those in cropland, for example. We talked about increasing, and we've been doing that, but increasing our capacity in plant breeding genetics, crop testing, particularly around drought tolerance and pest resistance, increasing our focus in those areas. There's a lot of new genetic methods out there that we can add, but we think that drought resistance, we think about wheat production, for example. Drought resistance, heat resistance, extremely important. We've been moving that along that line at K-State already, but we would ask for maybe more focus even than what we have. We also had really an interest in increasing our capacity to detect and mitigate invasive species. It might be insects, but I think many of our farmers on the Great Plains know that we've had increased weed problems and weed concerns over the last few years. We're expecting that we may see a continued shift in weed populations, so we think we're going to have a increasing capacity in pest resistance. And then the other big one there that we need is really increasing precision application of crop inputs in cropland. And that may be water, particularly irrigation. I think we all know the Ogallala throughout the southern Great Plains. In general, we're seeing a limited lifetime as we look at western Kansas, Panhandle, Oklahoma, and the Texas Panhandle. And so we really believe that we need to really increase our research and extension capabilities in that precision application of crop inputs.
On the livestock side, now, what sorts of things were discussed at this session?
Well, I think all the way from, and I was really the crops guy there,
right?
The crops guys. But when we get to livestock, really even looking at the genetics of the animal. As you move through the Great Plains, the beef production, you see different cattle in Texas than you do in Kansas, and particularly than you do in Nebraska. And so looking at what are the genetic work that needs to be done. Also looked at grazing lands. We would expect that will there be a change in grass, in the nutrient value of the grasses? If that would change, do we need to look at burning at different times? If we think about the wildfire the last 2 years in Kansas, 2 worst wildfires in the state of Kansas, does that mean we need to think about burning? And do we need to burn at different times more frequently? Do we need to burn less? Are there things that we need to do around grazing land systems and grazing land health? The one that was interesting, and I think that all of us that are concerned with western Kansas in particular are concerned about CAFOs. These are
confined animal feeding operations.
Right. Our beef feedlots, our dairy that's expanding in western Kansas, and really what impact, if climate change is occurring, what impact will that have on forage production and grain production and of course, animal performance too. Really concerned about how do we optimize forages and feed production in western Kansas, in southern Great Plains, particularly if the predictions for the Ogallala aquifer continue down the path they are and we'll have less water available for irrigation. How do we maintain that big part of a driver of our communities in Kansas?
Now, this conference was not setting out to come up with all of the answers to all of these questions and the many, many more included in the discussion here. But what is the hope of the group in as far as what happens with the information collected for this report from here?
Well, I think there's several things. One of them is that, of course, we have a lot of federal funding sources, and they try to make decisions in Washington, and they take a lot of input around the country, and they try to determine funding priorities. And we've already shared this with them. I hope to get there too, because obviously these are the type of funding priorities that we think they should be funding. Hopefully we'll be looking at that. And I hope this isn't just a static document that sits on the shelf somewhere, that we can come back in a year or two as we know more and look at this again and maybe reprioritize.
There is an intent for follow-up.
Right.
Then. If one would like to see the report and specifics included in the report, where might they find it, Dan?
Well, it'd be on my website, and that would be kcare.ksu.edu. So it'll be on that website. In the next few weeks, as you said, this is a 35-page report. Right. We're planning to come out with a one-page on each of the focus areas. So it'll be just the highlights of the conference. So those should be on my website also. And if anybody has any questions, I would definitely say give me a call or send me an email. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. And your contact information is at the website as well. Dan, lots of work went into this, so thank you for giving us a quick glimpse to it today.
Okay, thanks.
Dan Devlin with us, the director of the Kansas Center for Agricultural Resources and the Environment. He was an active participant in this conference, which generated a report on resilient Southern Plains agriculture in a varying and changing climate. That is the title, as a matter of fact, of the document you can find at kkare.ksu.edu out of Kansas State University. We'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. You're listening to the K-State Radio Network. Once again, thanks for joining us for Agriculture Today. We're going to take a closer look at a proposal which was announced by the Environmental Protection Agency just before the holiday break, and it is potentially of significance to the grain sorghum industry. Of course, Kansas agriculture well vested in that particular aspect of crop production. We brought by today the director of the Center for Sorghum Improvement here at Kansas State University, Sarah Sexton-Bowser, and joining us via phone from his office in South Central Kansas, Jesse McCurry, who is the executive director of Kansas Grain Sorghum. What we're talking about here, Sarah and Jesse, the EPA suggesting that sorghum oil, grain sorghum oil derived from ethanol production using grain sorghum, might actually qualify as a biofeedstock itself, and we'll get into all of that. Sarah, to you, grain sorghum has been a feedstock generally for ethanol for quite some while.
Correct, it has, and the ethanol industry is really one of the most innovative, value-added applications for our feedstuff grains. And so as we look at sorghum going into that, we want to make sure that sorghum is not only a great feedstock into the ethanol process, but also supporting the associated byproduct value streams. And that's what this announcement really gives credence to, is providing valuable byproduct streams for that sorghum feedstock.
And this is a byproduct which does occur presently in ethanol production utilizing grain sorghum, correct?
Correct. Ethanol plants that use a blend of feedstocks, including both corn and sorghum, are extracting oil, and that oil goes to associated byproduct value streams. And without a pathway for the sorghum oil, we're not able to go into the biodiesel pathway. And that's what this announcement and Federal Register announcement allows for, is for sorghum, along with the corn oil, to both support the pathway for the biodiesel.
Jesse, bring you in here in your capacity, you've been tracking the progress of this. Actually, this proposal was put on the table some time back, was it not?
That's right. The association world has really been focused on this since 2012, I believe, when the first conversations maybe occurred between some ethanol plant managers and national sorghum producer staff. And at first, I would probably tell you that there was a little bit of scratching the head of, does this make sense? Does it work? Could it work? And then it became a serious yes, and let's get after it for a long, long time. And so it was a welcome announcement to hear at the end of last year.
What does the announcement entail? Sarah gave us a flavor of it here just a moment ago, but in particulars here, what is it saying outright?
In the federal government world, really nothing matters until it's published in the Federal Register. That's when the clock really starts and you know that the talk has actually gone into action. And so what we have is a 30-day comment period where interested parties can weigh in on the proposal. What it does, as Sarah indicated, is it basically allows sorghum the same way corn oil has been utilized, because if ethanol plants are using natural gas and they're using grains like sorghum, they can get a greenhouse gas emission reduction, which gets them extra credit, if you will, qualifies an advanced biofuel, allows these product streams to go into biodiesel, and allows that plant to gain 20 cents or so. That that really adds up when you start talking about the amount of bushel and value. So we're not complete in the rulemaking process, but the clock has officially started, which is a big deal.
So we want to visit here some about the impact that this will potentially have for the grain sorghum industry and for those growing grain sorghum. But to get a notion of the scope of what we're talking about here, some numbers posted by the national sorghum producers in their petition supporting this proposal. The NSP is anticipating a potential of 12 million to 21 million ethanol equivalent gallons of fuel to be produced from sorghum oil per year. Those are numbers that garner attention, and deservedly so. It's substantial, Sarah, in that there is a large percentage of grain sorghum devoted to ethanol production itself, right?
Yeah, in general, over the long run, we look at the sorghum consumptive pie being a third ethanol production, a third livestock, and a third exports. And so if we consider a third of our crop going into the ethanol process as a feedstock, we certainly want to see associated value and confidence in the bioproduct streams. And that's what this is leaning into and providing us parity with what's been existing for corn.
So then, what kind of boost could it provide to grain sorghum production and utilization, which is most important here? Jesse?
Well, I think it locks in sorghum as a feedstock into the ethanol plant. Now, don't kid yourself. There's still more work to do with California and other policy things, but we've always felt, and the facts prove this out, that ethanol is a major buyer and wants to continue to be a major buyer of sorghum, and we want to support that. This helps bring us more on par as a feedstock. Ethanol plants will make buying decisions based on pricing and availability of the crop, and I think given where we're at, we're going to see more sorghum acres in Kansas going forward. And with this incentive sort of added into the mix, it just gives plants like Kansas Ethanol and Western Plains and Pratt and Conestoga just that much more reason to bid up the basis that benefits the local farmers.
And it adds to the portfolio of byproducts that could be derived from grain sorghum produced from ethanol, and that becomes substantial when you look at it collectively, Sarah.
Certainly, as we support the ethanol industry, we want the ethanol industry to be economically successful in their value-add efforts. And so this is feeding right into that and allowing them to find byproduct streams that diversify the mix for them as they look to add value to Kansas grain production.
And we don't want to overlook some of those other byproducts, DDGs among them, which when you dovetail that with the livestock industry here in the state, the potential still is yet to be fully tapped there, is it not?
Certainly, when we look at the research side of this, there's a continual effort in concert with the ethanol industry to evaluate how they compartmentalize the different attributes of grain and extract value. And so we're well aware of oil and distillers' grains, but the research efforts are thick and robust to continue to find those next generation byproduct value streams to support that effort.
So the proposal is out there. Jesse, there is this time frame during which comments will be taken, and then a decision will be made on implementation or withdrawing the proposal. What's your sense of where this is headed?
Well, I think it's in a very positive direction. We've had tremendous support from our elected officials, in particular Senator Moran and Congressman Marshall, behind the scenes here for a long time. I think everything is in place. The technical work, the analysis, the politics of it's all in place. You can never take anything for granted, but we should be in a very strong position to take this across the finish line.
From the aspect of the Center for Sorghum Improvement, this is simply another feather in the cap, if you will, in as far as research potential, in as far as exploring what sorghum brings to the table in a myriad of ways, other than just as a livestock feedstuff, Sarah.
The center, along with farmer leadership groups, including the Commission and Checkoff, are very much so focused around market development right now. We know with the current commodity price index that first and foremost, for our growers, we need to be looking for market opportunities and to grow that opportunity for our farmers to have a return on their investment in sorghum. And so this is a part of it, but we have several efforts supported by the Commission that are really centering around how we build markets for farmers in this particular price environment.
Very good. And before we let you get away, Jesse, to note that as this comment period continues over the next 3 weeks, roughly, producers need to weigh in on this, don't they?
They certainly will through their own associations. I know Kansas Farm Bureau and the State Association and others are already preparing very positive messages around this. There'll be some strategic work that goes into that, but we're in a good spot there. I would encourage your listeners to circle January 26th on their calendar for Kansas Commodity Classic in Manhattan and stay involved. I know everybody's busy, but it's important to be involved in their association.
That is creeping up on us quite quickly, that particular keynote event, the Kansas Commodity Classic in Manhattan here in the next few weeks, so take note of that. We appreciate your comments, Jesse, and Sarah, likewise. Thanks for being along with us here, talking about this with us.
Happy New Year.
That's Jesse McCurry. He's the Executive Director of Kansas Grain Sorghum, and with us here in the studios, the Director of the Center for Sorghum Improvement here at Kansas State University in its Department of Agronomy, Sarah Sexton-Bowser. What we've been referring to is this new proposal, once again put forth just before the holidays by the Environmental Protection Agency. It's a newly proposed pathway, as Sarah put it, for sorghum oil extracted from ethanol plants, now potentially qualifying as a biofuel feedstock itself for advanced biofuels and biomass-based diesel. We shall watch it very closely. Ahead of the break, slipping a word in here very quickly about that series of 3 K-State Sorghum Production Schools being offered in early February. These will cover a number of issues facing sorghum growers: weed control strategies, production practices, nutrient management, insect and disease management, and much more. These are set for February the 6th in Dodge City, February 7th in Hutchinson, and February 8th in Washington. The Kansas Grain Sorghum Commission co-sponsoring these and providing the lunch. Find out more about them at the respective extension offices in Ford, Reno, and Washington counties. And once more, when we return from the break, we'll tell you more about the companion K-State Production Schools for you soybean producers. Coming up even sooner, K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti standing by with a rundown on those. That and more still ahead on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson here. Well, a trio of K-State Soybean Production Schools will be offered later this month, providing in-depth information for you soybean producers. These schools will be held at 3 locations around the state. Monday, January 22nd in Phillipsburg, Tuesday, the 23rd in Salina, and Wednesday, January 24th in Rossville. K-State Crop Production Specialist Ignacio Ciampitti talks about these.
I think that there are a lot of questions about soybean productivity in new environments, many new environments. If you look at last year, our acres, they really fluctuate and they really increase. And I think that soybean will still be gaining some territory in the next coming years. Our main question is for many of our farmers that they are entering or probably they are going back to soybeans. I think that there are a lot of questions of how to work on soybeans, what are the main practices, how to deal with disease or insects. And that's kind of the main target of the school for this 2018. We were looking at the goal of let's start moving to new territories. And our first school will be in Phillipsburg,
which historically has not been soybean country per se, but the interest is starting to build up there.
You're exactly right, yes. And it's a very interesting location because I think that we would like to see our farmers from the northwest corner, those very good farmers that they are doing high-yielding irrigation soybeans, but also we would like to see in that school our new farmers, those guys that are starting to try soybeans as a new crop.
And dryland beans as well.
Dryland beans, exactly. So the school will have that kind of a flavor of more 101, a basic educational event for soybeans. And we will go from weed control, it's a big topic for 2018.
Right.
I think that will be a big topic for all winter.
Right.
We will also discuss main production practices in dryland and irrigated soybeans. I think that we need to emphasize those type of production systems that we have on this area of the state. Also, we'll be emphasizing, another factor like we have some insects issues past years, and also the goal of looking at rotation, disease. So many basic topics for the school in Phillipsburg. Then from there, we're moving back to, I would say, a good soybean territory. Central Kansas is becoming also now good soybean territory, so we will have our schools on January 23rd in Salina. In that event, one of the main probably things that we will be looking at is also these new systems of intercropping or even double crop. So double crop is becoming very popular. The double crop, when you look at the number of acres across the state, is really going up. Many farmers looking at wheat and looking at trying to use soybeans as a crop just to start gaining more economic profits there from that side. So I think that there will be a lot of interest of some of the new information that we have on double crop soybean production and how to increase and maximize productivity. Also, I think that this location, as always, we control one key factor in many of our locations. And one of the main things, when you are moving just to the eastern part, again, the region is changing. So we are moving to Rossville. That school will be on January 24th. It's a Wednesday, it's Rossville. And then in that location, we'll be focusing a little bit on more targeted topics. Around the Kansas River, we have some more issues on SDS, disease. So we have a lot of information on sudden death. That in the last couple of years, we are working with our agronomy manager from Rossville location, Dr. Eric Atkinson, and then he will be presenting some of that specific information related to SDS. Also, we'll be discussing some of the high-yielding soybeans and medium-yielding soybeans. So we'll have very good speakers, excellent schools. We're looking to pre-register by January 17, a week before the schools, to make sure that we have a good head count in all the schools. The schools are free, and that is just for all the support that we have from Kansas Soybeans. So Kansas Soybeans will be one of the main sponsor on the schools, providing support from organizing the schools and also lunch. And our partner also, that we welcome this year in the schools, Channel Seeds. So Channel will be also helping us, with some of the costs in the schools just to make sure that we can provide an excellent quality event, free to attend, and including lunch. So everything is just coming from these main sponsors, on the schools.
K-State's Ignacio Ciampitti, again, the 2018 K-State Soybean Schools, Monday the 22nd, Phillipsburg, Tuesday the 23rd, Salina, Wednesday the 24th in Rossville. They're asking you to pre-register no later than January 17th. Two ways of going about that. Go online to K-State Soybean Schools or via the local research and extension offices in the host counties, Phillips, Saline, and Shawnee counties. This is Agriculture Today, and on we go now to the Kansas Soybean Update for this week with Greg Akagi. Greg?
Charles Atkinson joins us. He's a soybean producer from Great Bend and serves as the Kansas representative on the American Soybean Association Board of Directors. And Charles, as we turn the calendar, we're not too far away from the 2018 Commodity Classic in Anaheim.
We're looking at the Commodity Classic this year at Anaheim, California. It's going to be February 27th, 8th, and March 1st. I do know we got an early bird reservations coming up here pretty quick in January, but mainly we want to encourage everyone that's interested in the new and innovative look at agriculture and get involved in all four of the commodities that are out there to have an experience. And if you've never been before, it is well worth your time and your money to go out there and basically be working with some of the top producers in the country.
And if you're an ASA member, a chance to meet not only with the state group, but the national group as well.
Our American Soybean Association, they do a lot. They'll be looking at some of the policy that they're working at. And, what I really enjoy about it is meeting people from other parts of the country. We all have our concerns and our issues in the state of Kansas, but it's interesting to see what the other guys are up against. So when it comes time to look at what they do with the Farm Bill or look at what they're doing on some of the policy, you have a little better feel of what the issues are across the country, and they can kind of understand a little bit more about what our other producers are up to across the nation.
That early bird registration deadline is January the 11th, and they can go to the Commodity Classic's website for more information.
The Commodity Classic, they've got a great website. Go to your favorite web server, type in Commodity Classic, and it'll take you right to the site. There's a whole list of speakers there. They're going to be talking about everything from production to chemicals to Farm Bill issues to planning of your estate. And I'm sure now with the passage of the tax bill, there'll be some people talking about that too.
Charles Atkinson joins us, a soybean producer from Great Bend and serves as the Kansas representative on the American Soybean Association Board of Directors. He joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Greg Akagi there. Thanks, Greg. This is Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Next up for you on this Agriculture Today, our weekly time set aside to talk horticultural matters. Of course, this stretch of the year, there are very few things going on outside, to say the very least. But for those of you who would like to get a jump start on the flower gardening season, you can sufficiently force certain bulb types to put on quite a display here in the wintertime, and we'll get into that now with Ward Upham. Ward, as you know, is a horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension. What we're talking of directly here, Ward, are what are called Paperwhite bulbs, and you might identify those for folks.
Yeah, this is a type of daffodil, and with most types of daffodils as well as most other bulbs, you need to have a chilling requirement for the bloom. In other words, they need 14 to 15 weeks after they're planted with moist soil between 35 and 50 degrees, or they're not going to bloom. Well, Paperwhite narcissus or Paperwhite daffodils are different. They don't need that chilling requirement. So we can force them to bloom inside and get the benefit of that flower. It takes a while. It takes usually about 4 to 8 weeks from the time you start the process until you get your blooms, but they do work.
But if only you follow certain steps here, which we'll get into today. And one thing that you need to be a bit fussy about, you say, is the container in which you'd grow these Paperwhites.
That's right. It's different than most containers that we normally use to grow plants. One, it doesn't have drainage holes. It needs to hold water instead of allow that water to drain. Second, it needs to be transparent enough that you can see the level of water in that container, because that's what you need to control in order to get a good result from these bulbs.
And that has to do with the position of the bulb in the container itself as to why you want to keep water within the container?
That's right, and also the media is different. We usually think of media, we think of potting soil. Not with these. What you're looking at is wash gravel, marbles, glass beads, stones, something that's really relatively coarse so you can see that water level. And really all you're doing is trying to stabilize that bulb. So what we do is we start with like a 3 to 4 inch container, again without drainage holes. Again, it has to be transparent so you see the water level. And put 1 to 2 inches of whatever your media is in there. Then place your bulbs. Then add additional media to stabilize those bulbs. Now, once you start watering, you're going to add enough water to cover the bottom of those bulbs. You don't submerge them. You don't put them completely underwater, just the bottom part of that bulb, maybe the bottom fourth of it. And that'll be enough that plant can take up all the water it needs and still be fine.
So no root-to-soil contact, as would be conventional, is necessary here. It's merely providing access to water.
Yeah, now it will form roots. It'll put roots out in that water and we'll take it up. But that's all it needs. It doesn't really need any fertilization or anything like that. Those flowers have already been formed. The buds are already in that bulb. And once you're done with this, you're done with it. I mean, you're going to throw them out because you don't have enough sunlight in order to make them work again the next year. So one of the problems we have with this when you do it is our temperatures are a little high for this. So usually we'd like 60 to 65 degrees or those plants get leggy. And a lot of people don't want to lower that temperature. So there is a trick that you can use in order to keep these plants shorter so they don't lodge, so they don't fall over.
And that would be what?
And that is you use, instead of water all the way through, you shift over to an alcohol solution. And this sounds like something that came off the internet, but it's not. It actually came out of Cornell University's flower bulb research program. And so they've looked at this. It does work. What you do is you start out with pure water. And once your growth gets 1 to 2 inches high, you're going to switch. From that point on, you're going to use your alcohol water. And that alcohol water is going to be just about 5% alcohol. The easy way to make that is to get some rubbing alcohol, which is 70% alcohol, and dilute it with 10 parts of water. So 1 part rubbing alcohol, 10 parts water, that's what you're going to use. So once you get 1 to 2 inches of new growth, pour off the water you were using before, and then from then on, you're going to use the alcohol water. Now, there's 2 ways of doing this. One is that every time that water starts to get below the level of the bulbs, then you just fill it up again to that original mark with your alcohol water. Or if you want even a more pronounced effect, what you can do is every time it gets down to that level, you pour out the old water, that old alcohol water, and replace it with new. Because some of that's evaporated, some of the alcohol's gone. And so that will give you a better effect. That's one of the things we can do in order to keep those plants shorter and a lot more attractive. And
the alcohol serves as something of a growth regulator in a sense.
Yeah, what we think, they really don't know. They haven't figured that out yet, but what they think it is it interferes with the uptake of some of that water, which stunts the plant. But it has no effect on flower size, has no effect on flower longevity, so it's not going to hurt the bloom at all, just keep those plants a little bit shorter.
Well, Ward, in forcing these Paperwhite bulbs, does one need to worry about the humidity in the growing area or any such thing?
Usually humidity isn't that big of a problem. You won't want it next to a register where you get hot air directly on that, or it's going to shorten the life of those blooms. And also avoid drafts, right next to a door, that type of thing. But what you need to watch out for is what you use for your alcohol. I mean, some people will decide to use beer or wine, and that's not a good idea because the sugars in there are going to mess things up.
Use rubbing alcohol.
Rubbing alcohol is going to be by far the cheapest. I mean, you can use hard alcohol, but it's an awful expensive way to do this.
You bet. And sunlight necessities for these bulbs, anything to be considered here?
Not really, since you're not going to reuse them. Everything that's in that bulb is enough to give you a good display. So adding sunlight would only be important if you're going to reuse them. And we don't have enough of that inside to really make a difference.
And if one follows all of these steps appropriately and they force these bulbs successfully, how long might they last?
Well, they should last several weeks, and so they'll put on a fairly good display. Again, it's going to take somewhere between 4 and 8 weeks to bring them into bloom once you start, but then they should stay in bloom for several weeks as well.
And you can even repeat the process if you're so inclined, and until we get into the actual growing season, which unfortunately is 3 months or so away.
That's right. So you can have different batches that you keep coming.
Once again, we're talking about what are called paperwhite bulbs. They're a daffodil. You can force those indoors here in the wintertime by just going through these basic steps for raising them. Thanks, Ward, for the time in the input.
You bet.
This week's horticulture segment featuring Ward Upham. He's a horticulturist with K-State Research and Extension. And once more, he mans the Horticultural Rapid Response Center here at K-State. You can talk with him about anything horticulturally speaking at 785-532-1438. 785-532-1438. That is our horticulture segment for this week and our time for this Thursday edition. Thanks for listening in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.